Please down, and we don't create a difficulty a little later on, because I can see that the hall is already full. Here, and I'm sure the panelists have created that with Shobha Day coming all the way from Mumbai. So we can start by giving her a very big hand. It will be my pleasure to say a few words in introduction. Shobha at 70, selective memory, bold and highly individualistic. Shobha Day's outspoken, provocative writing on urban India has influenced millions of young Indians. Ms. Day, who is the recipient for understanding all things Indian is extraordinary. His debut novel, The Smoke is Rising, won the Tata First Book Award for Fiction. 1.2 billion, his collection of short stories, was published in 2015. His second novel, Polite Society, a take on the Jane Austen classic Emma, where he makes some incisive observations about life in Lutyens, Delhi, was published last year to critical acclaim. We look forward to some scintillating and irreverent conversation between the two of you. Welcome to this morning, and have a great day, all of you.
Wow, this is so fabulous. Good morning. So fabulous. I mean, I can't tell you. It's such a pleasure to be back in your beautiful, green, historic heritage city after 20 long years. So thank you, organizers. And third edition of an important Lit Fest. It's fantastic to see the response. I can guarantee you, having done God knows how many Lit Fests in my long writing career, that 9:30 on a Sunday morning, I have never seen a crowd this fabulous. And may I add, this well-dressed. So take a bow.
Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to echo my thanks. We were a little bit sort of perplexed as to how many people would show up at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, but you've really done the city proud. So thank you for being here this morning. And of course, it shouldn't be a surprise because the draw was exceptional this morning.
Okay.
I mean, often we start these conversations with, this person needs no introduction and other cliches like that. But really, I can't think of anyone in India who really needs less of an introduction than Shobha De, who's had this long and varied and rich career as one of India's most celebrated columnists, as an author of 20 books, fiction and nonfiction, and continues to work today in the media. She edited The Phenomenon, that was Stardust, and a couple of other magazines. So we are really very privileged to be able to talk to her on the occasion of the recent publication of her latest book, 70 and To Hell With It. And of course, that title encapsulates the honesty and the daring do for which you're now known. And just to kick things off, when I started reading the book, I was struck quite quickly by something you said in one of the opening pages. You said that you felt that you were suspended between the old India and the new India. Yeah. And in your previous memoir, Selective Memory, there is a passage in which you talk to your daughter and you ask her, what word describes me best? And the word that your daughter says to you is traditional. And you said, oh, my daughter really knows me best. So just to get things rolling, I'm very curious as to what you think is the old India, what is the new India, and why are you suspended in between?
Whew, that might need 5 hours to actually do justice to a question like this. Before we get into it, I'd just like to say thank you, Mahesh. Rarely do I come across someone who's going to be in conversation with me, someone as celebrated as Mahesh is with his body of work, his genius, who has taken so much trouble to actually read the books we are going to be talking about. Most people don't do their homework. They're so arrogant. The stars. I've been at a Jaipur Lit Fest where the person has walked up to me 3 seconds before we are going on and said, can you just quickly tell me what the book is about? Or shall we just wing it? You know, at that point, what do you say? I mean, wing it and let's hope that, they don't boo you off the stage. So thank you, Mahesh, for a very, very detailed and a very sincere look at my work. To answer your question, being suspended between the new and old India, it's extremely important to carry on a dialogue. You cannot just say, I belong to another era, because that makes you irrelevant instantly. You have to be tuned into the minds of the young. The young tell you everything you need to know about the present, and certainly it's a wonderful window into the future. So when I say I'm suspended, it's it's like having one foot in the 70s, 80s, 90s, which were for me very deeply felt formative years, and the other one in the lives of my 6 children and my 6 grandchildren. Now, if I cannot connect to them, uh, what use am I as a grandmom? They won't have any time for me, and that would be terrible. I have to understand their world, and the best way to understand their world is to understand their music. Yeah, so I understand their music because through that I get to understand them and to figure out what it is that is so fascinating about those lyrics. But I think every generation feels suspended. I'm sure my parents felt a complete disconnect at some stage with my world, being the youngest of 4 siblings. And my father being a bureaucrat, it was a world for me which was exploding with opportunities. And it was a different India than the one they knew. And they didn't approve of either this new India or of their youngest daughter. So we cannot sit in and take these kind of positions and be inflexible. You have to be switched on at all times. So this India, I find, is, again, an India which is so restless and so energetic in its hopes and aspirations and its dreams. And I want to be a part of it. I don't want to be sitting there saying, oh, this is awful, this is terrible, look at the young, look at the movies, look at the... No, no, no. Because every single, whatever it may be, a movie, a film, a poem, a painting, a book, is telling us something about ourselves. And that mirror has to be there at all times if you want to keep up, if you want to grow as a person yourself. So.
You mentioned your formative years, and I just want to take you there briefly. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about any filmy gossip or anything.
No, please ask, but it may not interest anyone else.
You know, people first came to know about you as a media person through your editorship of Stardust, which quickly became a phenomenon. And when I was reading your memoir, you know, we had this idea of your world as possibly one of, you know, glamour and beauty and glittering people and parties, et cetera, et cetera. But when I read Selective Memory, I mean, what sprung out is the way you described the visceral dinginess of your offices, the horrible smells. I mean, you would walk out and, as you say, there were rats the size of puppies on the street. And you know, this is not the kind of life we thought you led, Shobha De. So tell us about those early days. You know, what was it like when because you started at Stardust at a very young age.
Yes. Well, I'm so sorry to disappoint you if it is far from glamorous, but the world of journalism is not glamorous. It's a lot of slog, which people perhaps don't always acknowledge. They may be aware of it, but marginally so. There's nothing romantic about being in journalism. And Stardust was a startup. It was a person taking a chance on a magazine that then went on to become a breakthrough magazine. And what we did in the 70s became mainstream much later, the language we invented and all of it. But essentially, it was a dump. It was an absolute dump. It was, you know, I used to sit on top of a water tank in a little attic, which was smelly. And it was a shabby street then. It continues to be a shabby street today. But of course, Stardust subsequently moved into a rather handsome building of their own at Prabhadevi. But I was not with Stardust or the group of magazines anymore, though we continued to be close friends.
You mentioned language, and something we take for granted these days is, you know, English, this sort of masala mixture of argot and formal English that we have. We see it in advertising slogans, we see it on social media. It's become our common currency today. But life was very different back then, and Stardust and what you did with language was actually very, very radical, because normally publications in those days, they read as if they were written by a civil servant who was producing things in triplicate, you know, and it was a very almost Victorian kind of English. And Stardust just blew a hole through all of that, and you began to write the way people speak, what you were hearing on the streets. Did you feel you were doing something different or radical then?
No, not at all, because I don't think one can engineer these things. They have to be organic. And when I started using colloquialisms a lot and street speak a lot, it's because I'm deeply interested in languages. I like to hear different accents. I like to hear the way people speak. Like yesterday, for example, at the dinner, I will remember forever, and it'll probably pop up in either a column or a book somewhere, because, you know, things stay. For most writers, the minutiae stay. And I heard, veju or non-veju? I loved it. So when I started to use what is called Bambaiya, which is really a mix of many, many languages, because like Mumbai itself, it is a cauldron. It's always a bubbling cauldron of languages, sights, sounds, tastes, because people from all over India come there to make it, and a lot of them do. So those words, which could be from Bihar, they could be from Calcutta, they could be from down south, from wherever, started to fascinate me more and more. And I said, you know, we are not living in Jane Austen's era. Why should we be writing in a language which was already antiquated then? Nobody in England used it anymore. And we were stuck in a kind of a time warp, and we were not getting out of that and using extremely dull. So I was so bored. So it was just a decision that actually emerged out of boredom. And I'm so glad that I was supported by the publisher, who at the end of the day was paying the bills for the magazine to be successful. And when he discovered that this magazine and the language had caught on the way it did, of course, then there was encouragement all the way. So it was using language in a way that was new. And I believe language is not written in stone. It's like being on the banks of a river. And the river is going through so many different territories, and you pick up something from where it's flowing and incorporate that. And that's what makes language exciting, and it makes it not static.
And it is remarkable that it sort of changed, it almost changed the way everyone writes in the media.
It did, but you know, at the time, I have to share this, when I started to write that way, there are a lot of people who said, oh, poor girl, she doesn't know how to write English, so she's using all these odd words and the phraseology because maybe she didn't go to a very good school. 10 years later, it was the mainstream newspapers. They were using the exact same words. And like you said, then it became advertising slogans. So, but when that happened, I got bored. Because something had been achieved, done organically, it was fun, I'd had fun doing it, but it was no longer thrilling for me to continue.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about that time, when I was reading the book, these were the emergency years, and you describe the censorship that was in place at that time. And I think it's very easy for us and younger people to take freedoms for granted, you know, that we have, that the press is free, that freedom of expression is guaranteed under the Constitution. But this was a time when these constitutional rights were suspended. And, but I was really surprised that even with a film magazine, you know, not something that dealt necessarily with hard news or political analysis or statistics or anything like that, there was severe restrictions on Stardust too, and you write that sometimes 80% of the magazine had to be rewritten at the last minute. So what kind of things were they objecting to in a film magazine?
Well, to just give a backgrounder to the emergency for a lot of people who may not be completely aware of what was going on then, and you talked about press freedom. It was a myth then, it's a myth now. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a free press, not just in India, but anywhere in the world. It's how you choose to demonstrate your power as a state. That is the only differential. But censorship today is equally lethal. It may not be as blatant as Shukla, who was the information minister at the time, coming and threatening me, and I burst out laughing because I thought it's a joke. When he said, "I'll hang you from a public square." And I said, "No kidding," and I laughed. And he wasn't amused. I really thought it was a joke. How do you say that to a woman that, you know, I don't like what you represent, I don't like what you do, I don't like your magazine? And it was in the presence of co-editors. I wasn't alone in a room with them to threaten me. It was said publicly. And of course, nobody did anything about it. But 80%, as you said, of the magazine was censored. Maybe because films do play a huge role in popular culture in our country. They are indeed very influential. So if there are magazines which are irreverent enough to cover cinema and to cover actors who may be outspoken, and at that time, Mr. Amitabh Bachchan was very, very close to the powers that be. He was extremely close to the Gandhi family. And there were murmurs that perhaps he didn't like his coverage in the film press, and in particular in Stardust. So that was it. And 80% of the magazine, and once you rewrote it, you had to resubmit it to the censor chief, and whose name, by the way, was Rao.
No relation.
But it was a challenge. You know, it's not just Stardust, everybody had to play ball.
What were the mechanics of it? You would have to send a mock-up of the issue to the ministry, and then it would come back with red pen all over it, or yeah.
That's it.
I mean, I'm stressing it because it is kind of astounding to us that these were the mechanics of, you know, hardcore censorship at play.
Yes.
But like you say, today it's not exactly like that. The press is free. There are
Not exactly, but
understating slightly here, but you know, there are very many different forms of censorship at play today. For example, government choosing to withdraw ad spending from publications which are not complementary to it, restricting access to journalists, you know, where media houses are being consolidated by people who are friendly with the government. So there's various ways and modes of censorship today too. But having lived through that hardcore censorship where these constitutional freedoms were suspended, what do you make of the situation today? Are you worried? Are you concerned? How is it different from those days?
well, we don't have people like Ramnath Goenka anymore, who were press barons of an old school and who stood up. We don't have too many editors around who'd go to jail for what they're saying through their papers. And a form of protest, which is quite universal and which Ramnathji did, in fact, enforce, was a blank Indian Express. There was, you know, the entire paper was blank pages. And that was a very strong way of showing your contempt for what was going on. Today, it's a totally different picture because more or less media is controlled and owned by corporates, business people. And almost all of media is controlled by perhaps one or two families. And there aren't too many people challenging the status quo at all. And it's either that or you're out of the game. And like you said, it's about squeezing a newspaper with some kind of independence, starving them of advertising, threatening calls, social media attacks. I think at some point someone had done some sort of a survey that I was one of the most trolled women in Southeast Asia, which I probably am, but I like what Disraeli had said to the Queen, and I follow that to this day. He said, never explain and never complain. So I don't read the trolls, but you know how it is. Good friends will always call you and give you the worst news because they love and adore you, of course. So there's always someone who'll call me and say, oh my God, do you know that there's a morcha coming to your house? Or do you know what so-and-so said about you? So you live with it. I mean, I've made an informed choice to be who I am and to say what I want. And so long as we still call ourselves a democracy, I will continue to do so. And I'm not going to be the person who blinks. I don't care.
So when you'd finished the editorships of your 3 magazines, you moved on to becoming a very prolific columnist. And in your book, you said you felt you'd really found your forte. I mean, it's obviously something you enjoy. You have a vast sort of array of interests, and you have an opinion on all of them. But this was a time when columnists were a slightly rare breed, and there weren't that many outlets. Now, in 2019, almost everyone is a columnist. We all have access to air our opinions all day long. Yeah. And in fact, journalism has changed. There's less money invested in the kind of investigative journalism that happens. And a lot of it is being replaced by, think pieces and the daily hot take, God spare us. But, there are 100,000 hot takes every day. Yeah. So in today's world, with the saturation of opinion and comment, what is the role of a columnist?
Well, to start with, I entirely approve of these hundreds and thousands of opinions by the minute, as it were, because why should it be that only a columnist or a newspaper editor sitting in an ivory tower somewhere up on a pedestal can pontificate and express an opinion? Every single person in this room has an opinion, and today they can express it. So the idea of citizen journalism is something that appeals a lot to me. It is today. You have to, if you have that access, you must use it. And a lot of stories, in fact, are being broken, not by journalists. Like you said, there's hardly any investigative journalism left. We don't want to invest that kind of, we don't have the resources or the will to invest those resources in following up a story like they once did. And the columnist at that time, I mean, there were senior columnists who I can easily name, but they may not be relevant today to a lot of young people in this room. But that opinion came from a very strong base, either an academic base or a knowledge base. It wasn't just someone shooting off his or her mouth. Today, it's different. You have to be able to grab those eyeballs, as they say, and keep them sticky. And you have to say it all, the most earth-shaking thing in 700 words, because if you cannot do that, you've lost your reader or you've lost your audience on television. So it is a new skill set. So those of us who are still, I guess, out there and people are still reading us, either we change or we become irrelevant. I've chosen to change.
But are you ever concerned that this becomes a race to the bottom, in a sense, because of the clickbait culture? I mean, things have to be more outrageous, more controversial in order to, in the sea of opinion, to get the eyeballs, to get the clicks. So do you ever think that that there is, what we need is pause, that we need reflection, we need more nuance, but the way the comment industry is constructed doesn't allow for that?
I haven't actually experienced that directly myself. Yeah. So there has never ever been a call from an editor or an editorial group to say, can you pump it up? Never. So, and I don't go for the outrageous for the sake of doing and saying something outrageous. I wouldn't do that because I find that just very a cheap way of attracting attention. So if I'm still in print, I would like to believe that the editors and their readers, because as you know, everything is on algorithms, and every single column today is monitored as to how many clicks and how many people are, thank you so much, how many people are reading that column. Yeah. You can track it to the last person. So in such a situation, I like that competitive edge. And I like to extend myself that much more. I write 4 columns a week, which is already, I think, way too much, but I enjoy it. It's my natural pace. And from the responses I receive from readers, I feel it's worth every bit of it, every bit of the effort.
You mentioned your use of social media. You're a prolific and user of social media. You do it very well. You have a great fan following there. Well, I mean, these are different mediums, each of them. So let's talk about Twitter first, which is probably where you have your biggest reach. I mean, you touched on this, possibly the most trolled woman in Asia. I mean, no matter how robust one is and how, accustomed you are to this sort of thing, does it not take a toll somewhere?
If I allowed it to, it probably would.
That's all you're going to say?
No, I can say more. Because Twitter has got me into a great deal of trouble in the past.
Yeah, I wonder if you could take us through what I've been calling Vada Pav Gate. Yeah. Only because it is indicative of how something so small and really quite innocuous can lead to really, really dramatic events in your life.
Well, yes, but at the end of it all, I'll just very briefly tell you, it's a party called the Shiv Sena in Mumbai. We all know what a glorious and brave and courageous party it is. They objected to my making a mention. They wanted Marathi cinema, Marathi films to be played almost under duress at a specific prime time viewing in the multiplexes. I have nothing. I think Marathi cinema is outstanding. So I'm a great supporter of Marathi cinema, Marathi culture, everything, being a Maharashtrian myself. But it's not about being a Maharashtrian. Objectively speaking, it is world class. So, but to insist for a political party to dictate to multiplex owners, it's a commercial decision. They have no right to be interfering in it. It's completely their prerogative when to show it or if to show it at all. So in that context, Vada Pav is a very popular snack in Maharashtra, and the Shiv Sena has Vada Pav stalls across Maharashtra. So I said, will Vada Pav be replacing popcorn? If you want to read all kinds of anti-Maharashtrian views into something, you can.
This was the tweet.
This was the tweet saying that, is a popcorn going to be replacing Vada Pav soon? And saying that, this thing about arbitrarily insisting on a certain time slot for a Marathi film is not fair. These are commercial decisions. So a mob of about 400 Shiv Seniks, extraordinarily well-behaved gentlemen and ladies, turned up at our gate and wanted to, actually what they said in Marathi very crudely, they came with a large, like a huge basket of vada pavs, which they said they wanted to actually shove, it's a very crude word in Marathi, down my throat and gag me with them. So by that time, I had at least 20 or 30 police people in the building, in my home, telling me, you don't know these people, you cannot engage with them, you must not go down, we are here to protect you, and you can't even go to your balcony, they may throw stones on you. They'd also come to blacken my face. That was another very strong objective, and they'd come armed with surma and tar and what have you. So after this went on and on for about an hour, I thought it's very inconvenient for my neighbors to have to deal with this rubbish. So I'd better go down and deal with it myself. So the police people, they were insistent. They said, no, you can't. So I said, well, come with me. Or are you scared? So we did go down. And I met these wonderful people. And I said, and they gave me the vada pavs. I said, if you don't mind, thank you very much. And I took a picture and I immediately tweeted it saying, delicious. Fantastic. And I said, since I can't eat all of it, if you don't mind, I'll share it with the people upstairs, the police and staff and whoever else, building watchmen, everybody. So they were a bit stumped because I don't know, they expected me to be very angry, but I was laughing and I said, anything else? So then they yelled, Murdabad, Murdabad, and so on. And then the cops sort of timorously pushed 3 or 4 of them into the police van. And then the rest of them realized they'd wasted their time and they left. So it depends who blinks first. You must never blink. You must confront bullies because they're cowards. What are they going to do?
And this led to continued police protection for you?
It did, yeah. And then there was a subsequent tweet which led to a privilege motion in the assembly. Now that is even, I mean, it's sinister because, you know, if they succeed, you are literally marched off from that assembly, 90 days inside, no questions asked, till you can then probably present your case again. So anticipating some such thing, and I said, I will not present myself in the assembly because I'm not going to apologize. There's nothing to apologize for. So it was not contempt to start with. So I was just very fortunate that my husband and my family members, all of them, supported this decision that I would not go and humiliate myself in front of those members of our assembly. You have to see them to believe it. And so the only option left was to move the Supreme Court and challenge it. But even that is a touch and go thing because you don't know whether it's going to come up for hearing till your the date given to you to appear. If it doesn't come, then you can be arrested immediately and so on. Well, I think the forces, positive forces in the universe were on my side. It did come up and it was thrown out by the Supreme Court. But by then, they'd made life really very hard in every sense. And I was under police protection for more than 2 years, and that wasn't fun at all for any of us to have these guys, literally, I mean, they're just there, 24/7. They're outside your home, they're in the car with you, they come wherever you go, and that in itself is quite a joke, because though they claim to be trained and they're SPG and so on, it's almost comical. I wish I could have filmed it all. Because our conversations, my children's conversations with those police people, it is a sad reflection of how poorly trained they are, in fact. So they'd be sitting outside having coffee outside our door, and they quite enjoyed the snacks that the lady in our house, she's really very good, and she'd ask them very politely every morning what they'd like to eat. Soon there was a menu going for, and you know, they'd be sitting with the guns on the table, just like that. Anyone can grab a gun. I mean, it's against any kind of security drill. When they're in the car, I would ask them, I said, how would you know if there was going to be an attack? So they said, Madam, see, normally what can happen is they'll come alongside on motorcycles and shoot you. I said, that's very helpful. And what will you be doing? So, and where is your gun right now? He said, in my shoe. I said, how will you reach for it? He said, we are trained. You don't worry. We'd go to a book reading in a very crowded bookstore. I'd be like, I'm here. This guy would be wherever he is, and he'd be on his phone, probably checking his wife's messages or something. So I asked him, and what would you do in this crowd if someone were to attack? He said, again, we are very well trained, madam. We can sense danger at 200 meters. We will simply walk towards you. So it had become such a monumental joke that I went to the police station and I said, I want to sign off on this because it's not fair to these young men. I'm sure they have better things to do, and the city has more important targets than someone like myself. They said, well, you please sign off on it, and whatever happens to you after this, we are not responsible like they were responsible to start with. So I did happily sign off, and I said, I don't need your protection. That's very kind of you.
I'm sort of nervously looking around to see if there's anyone here now.
200 meters.
200 meters,
yeah.
yes. But it is completely extraordinary that a simple tweet can lead to this situation where you needed 2 years of police protection. And you said that your family on this occasion were very supportive. But do your friends or family, or people in your life in general, say to you, Shobha, why don't you just tone it down a bit? Like, I mean, it's enough. You're putting yourself at risk, and what is it achieving? And do you face that kind of pressure?
By my husband 10 times a day, yes.
And what's your response?
I smile and go back to tweeting.
In your book, what seems to cause you the most sort of difficulty, it seems, within the social media sphere is actually Facebook. From when I was reading 17 to Hell With It, because a lot of the book reads like it's a dialogue you're having with yourself. It's sort of an internal monologue, and you're sort of almost debating with yourself certain positions. And you call yourself a show-off a number of times in the book. And then you retract and say, well, actually, maybe I've earned the right to show off, And then you go back, but then I think this is showing off a bit. It seems like there is this sort of unease sometimes with the fact that you have this very big public persona, and what do you do with it, and how do you manage it, and how do you negotiate that?
Well, I'm not Kim Kardashian, so I don't have exactly monumental problems of that kind. The difference being that Kim and their family, they've made a living out of it. In my case, it's a fallout of what I say in the public space. And not all of it is always fantastic and wonderful, because there are expectations. For example, this morning, had I turned up in something less appropriate, let's say, than they expected, there would have been sort of chatter that, oh my God, is this Shobha Day? I mean, is she, is she having a bad hair day? Is it a bad morning for her? So there are those kind of expectations which sometimes can be, it just makes me a little impatient. But I cannot, truthfully say that, oh my God, I'd love to be an anonymous little old lady knitting sweaters for my grandchildren, because I don't see myself as that kind of a grandmother. And it is, for me, my generation rather, we are the first generation, certainly in India, of working grandmoms. So I think I would rather focus on that being the takeaway for my grandkids, that they take it for granted that yes, women work, their mothers work, we work. So rather than focusing on the externals and maybe rolling their eyes, because I did get a tattoo much before they were born. I mean, I didn't know that I'm going to have all these grandkids, and I don't want to erase the tattoo. I love it. So that, besides little things of that kind, these are details. I hope everybody sees the bigger picture, because regardless of how you might judge whosoever, it could be a public person like in the movies, who have to deal with this in a way that is horrendous, but then they're also being paid huge amounts of money to have that public image. Whereas a contemporary of mine in the same space, who could be a male, would not be under the same sort of scrutiny. So this is where sometimes gender can be a bit irritating, but
there are big double standards with
yes?
the scrutiny.
Switched off? Thank you.
Big double standards with the scrutiny that is applied.
The scrutiny, but I think women across the board and in all fields are subjected to it. And we do live in an ageist world, which is one of the reasons why I did write 70 and to Hell With It, because it was important to send that message out, that it's not the end of the world. You're turning, whatever it may be, 50, 60, 70, 40. Today, the panic attacks that I've noticed start at around 32 or 35, and they're rushing off to fix themselves and do all kinds of things. in a way that's almost desperate because it's so competitive. And that pressure is unfair. Whereas, yes, across the world, in a very ageist world, a woman of 70, certainly a woman even at 40, is seen as well past her sell-by date. You know, her childbearing years may be over, and then what do we do with her? So
They should just disappear.
yeah, or just mind their own business, you know, go off and or seek a spiritual kind of, which is all, society is very safe with ladies who suddenly start dressing differently and start chanting or go off on spiritual retreats. It can't be a spa, it has to be somehow endorsed, spiritually endorsed. So I wouldn't want any of it for myself, and I wouldn't want to communicate that to women of my vintage, my age, because this generation of women, particularly in India, we look after ourselves much better than our mothers did. We eat differently. We are aware. We have a lot to share with the world. We have a lot to give of ourselves to our families, our friends, to society at large. So why should I surrender to anybody's stereotypical mold of what a 70-year-old woman is meant to do with the years remaining to her? I want to, you know, go off into the big beyond, wearing high heels and dancing. Why not?
So just to reiterate, 70 and to hell with it. Yeah. So we've talked about gender a little bit now, which brings us quite neatly onto Me Too, which has been sort of something that many of us have been talking about since the Me Too movement kind of exploded in India around last October. It seems like it was a much longer time, but actually it's not been that long. It's not even been a year. And of course, this started in the West, and there was this there was the big Harvey Weinstein reports that came out, and it took a while to gather momentum here. But eventually, there was this list of academics that was being circulated online by Raya Sarkar and others, and then it hit the comedy world. AIB, etc. And then there seemed to be, it almost like took over like a wildfire for a brief spell, where a lot of women were coming out with their testimonies and talking about how due process had failed them, about the sometimes decades of sexual harassment, abuse, and worse that they had tolerated. So it started with the entertainment industry, people in the entertainment industry talking about this. It spread to the corporate world, advertising, media, etc. So it felt like a big moment at the time, and you've been a vocal supporter of the Me Too movement. Where do you stand on it now?
I haven't budged even a centimeter from my support towards victims, men and women, not just women. To establish who is a victim and who isn't, it's the job of the courts. People like myself, we can only express support, but there's nothing we can do beyond that. It's a shame that the movement itself has kind of fizzled out, even in India, very rapidly. Some people took a really big hit, the people in the comedians. Some people in media took a hit. But everybody is now waiting to be somehow rehabilitated. And for people do have very short memories. And they're hoping it'll all just sort of go away and disappear. And they'll be co-opted back into the system. And I see that happening too. It only takes the courage and the tenacity of someone like Tanushree, who is not giving up, and hats off to her, because she has no support, because she was not a big noise, she was not a big star when she did accuse Nana Patekar, who has, of course, been exonerated by his colleagues. Almost all the people in the film industry have been given certificates by their colleagues. But she has not given up, and she's going to pursue it. And I think people like that deserve support. And if she has stuck to whatever it is, and she has not wavered, and her narrative has not changed for over 10 years, we can't just dismiss her off as a woman who was slighted. She must get a fair hearing in a court, not public, not kind of a public flogging saying she's doing it for publicity, because it's so easy to dismiss, particularly women, that they're doing it either because they're spiteful, they're vindictive, or they need the publicity, or they're blackmailers. All of it is really horribly unfair.
You mentioned the courts. I mean, in an ideal situation, that would be where the final arbitration of these matters occurs fairly. But I think the reason for this movement occurring is because of the repeated failures of due process, whether in the courts or whether in companies or grievance procedures, HR procedures. There's a massive failure across all of these arenas to address this issue properly. And it seems to me like there's a question mark. I mean, you said that the movement may have fizzled out, but it seems like we've pressed the pause button as we wait for the MJ Akbar case to kind of resolve itself, and people are watching, because this is the first case of a post-Me Too, very prominent, powerful individual who was accused by multiple women of harassment and worse. And it's now gone to the courts. And do you think the outcome of this case will decide the future of the movement, possibly?
Oh, most definitely, because here, as you mentioned rightly, he is a very powerful person. And it is MJ Akbar who has taken the initiative and gone to court. It's not the other way around. Yeah. So he has slapped the lady with a defamation charge. Now, whether she has the wherewithal to defend herself or to process that accusation in the way that it should be remains to be seen. But from what one hears from Delhi in the corridors of power, he's pretty much back in the game. He's got an influential new job to handle, which is a government job. He may not be a minister anymore, but he's certainly not a powerless fellow who's taking on a whole bunch of charges. Now, whether the rest of the ladies will join forces and fight strenuously remains to be seen, because it's also about logistics. It's going to be difficult for them. They don't live in India, or they don't live in Delhi. So to leave it to lawyers who may or may not be as committed and as passionate, it remains to be seen. But yes, it is a test case, because if he loses the defamation case, which can go on for 10 years, I know I've faced many, then the whole purpose is defeated, isn't it? It's so discouraging.
But also, is it not in the nature of this kind of movement that there will be an ebb and flow? And so it may seem that things have quietened down, and there are fewer stories and there are fewer sort of accusations. But as soon as someone else gets the courage to come forward, there might be another sort of flashpoint, and that's just how these things go, because it's still very new. I mean, it's not gone on for very long.
I'm not sure, Mahesh, because I see a lot of the high-profile men who were accused back in society, back at parties, back being buddy-buddy with people who had shunned them initially, thinking that they're social pariahs now that they are accused. But no, I met one at the Bangalore airport, perfectly cheerful, happy, gregarious, like nothing has ever happened. And I see a lot more of that actually taking place with high-profile people, in which case I think we only have ourselves to blame, that we didn't have the moral courage or the patience to stay with a movement which I think was one of the singularly most important movements in the last 100 years. Because women have had it bad. They've had centuries of repression, and they've had to deal with the worst kind of atrocities. And today, finally, when they do get a voice and they do speak up, all the forces seem to combine to make them shut up and go away. But I don't think women are today the kind who are going to shut up and go away. Not at all. It's just that women and men who feel the same way about a movement of this kind, we need to consolidate. We need to get together in a more meaningful way. And certainly the governments of different countries and have to demonstrate their seriousness equally. I don't see it happening anywhere. Not in the West. Not here, not in the East, nowhere. So it's like, I mean, it sounds too dramatic perhaps, like it's a whole conspiracy, some of it spoken, some of it unsaid, a lot of it unspoken, that if we don't show women their place now, we've all had it. So let's be sensible about this, chaps, and let's keep them out of this and suppress the movement. That's what it appears to me.
I think we're coming up towards the end of our time, so I think I'll just finish on this one thing. I mean, you do mention in the book that you're quite tired of having to give advice. People come to you, your family members, friends, all sorts of people, you know, advice. But I'm just going to add to your burden, I'm afraid, a little bit now. And so, for people starting out on their careers, you know, young people today, what would you say? What advice would you give them in the sense that, you know, what you wish people had told you when you were starting out on your long and varied career?
It's extremely important to, it sounds very simple, but it's that one of the toughest things in the world is to know yourself and to be very clear about your shortcomings and to know how to deal with failure is very key for young people because it can be so heady. You know, you start off your life, everything's going great guns, and suddenly you come across that first hurdle or the first challenge and you're stumped because maybe your family has made you believe that you're infallible, but nobody's infallible. So for me, it was a valuable learning, and if you ask me specifically about writers and writing, I would say you have to be a good listener in order to write well. You have to read a lot. You have to have the insatiable curiosity of a child. Nothing but nothing should tire you or bore you because every single human being has a story, and a good storyteller knows how to get that story out of that person. So that sense of alertness, you have to be like, it's always a red alert. You cannot, it's a hunger. And it's wonderful because that's what drives you, you know, you want to know everything. I want to know everything about every single person in this room. It won't be possible in this short thing, but it has to be that level of passion to do anything well. If you don't have that passion, think of something else that gives you that charge, that gives you that spark, that tells you, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Well, let's try and satiate your hunger a little bit. But we have time, I think, for a few questions. So if, I don't know if there's a mic in the, or if you could just stand up and shout.
Just identify themselves.
Anyone for a question? Sorry, ma'am, just go ahead and then yeah.
But they need to hear you too. So you.
Yeah, you can use this, ma'am. Can you use this?
Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Our women are really empowered right now. And what is the future of women in the year of 2025?
It's very specific.
Very specific. 2026. Okay. Well, are women empowered? Are men empowered? No. We're all struggling. We're all trying to survive and cope. I think we can do it if we are sensitive to one another. It's not just about women suddenly saying, I'm very empowered, you know, because she's not doing it in isolation. She's doing it with the support of society at large and the people in her life. So we should all strive for that, men and women, and hope to achieve the best in ourselves. So I'm very optimistic because I think the young today are just phenomenal, and there's no stopping their dreams. And that is the future of our country too.
There was a question here. Yeah, sorry.
Shobha, you mentioned about the expectation that at 70 you are supposed to go the spiritual way. On the contrary, I see that the youngsters are going the spiritual way. The Babas and the Gurus are becoming very, very influential. What's your take on that?
Well, there's nothing wrong in going the spiritual way. Let me please clarify for those who seek a higher calling or a higher purpose in life, and someone helps them to get there at whichever age. We all seek answers in different ways. But you're right, we are just enriching a lot of fraudulent people who have business empires which will actually stun if someone were to go into it and open up some of their tax records, if they pay tax at all, and all the products in the marketplace which are sold under various Guruji brands. Without any scrutiny and no accountability. These are all criminals parading as spiritual leaders. So I hope that at least one or two of the prominent ones who are there to save the politicians, save everybody, at least one or two of them first should have a hard and swift knock, business-wise, where it hurts the most. Take away their money and there'll be nothing.
I'm Sujata. It's a privilege to listen to you live. You write 4 columns in a week. Besides that, you must be having your personal commitments, social commitments, and professional commitments like this. Do you have a strict routine for writing?
Yes, there is no shortcut. You need that discipline. You cannot say, I will postpone writing a column because you have a deadline. And if it has to go by 2 o'clock every afternoon, which is when they close the paper, it is something that's non-negotiable. So it is a discipline, and I've adhered to it for over 45 years. So it is a rhythm of my life.
We have a Jen.
Good morning. I have one question. During the course of your conversation, you mentioned that the idea of freedom of the press is a myth in the past, at present, and probably in future. Well, if that is so, my question is, does it mean that all the publishers, including while you are editor of 2 or 3 magazines, all these publishers were feeding their readers with fake news? Have they been dishonest as to purvey just myth? Feed them with myth?
Yes, not fake news, but every publisher in the universe is compromised on some level or the other. It could be because of political pressure, it could be because of monetary reasons, it could be a whole array of compromises that they have to make. It is a very tough game and a very competitive game. Fake news is a term that's been invented by this incredible man, Mr. Trump, who's, I'm sure, going to win his 2nd term too. But that is when you start appealing to the lowest common denominator, and you choose a person like that, you deserve the news you're getting. So he's an out-of-control man. And we are in fact, regularizing him too. We are not reacting anymore to those crazy tweets. No one, even world leaders have sort of backed off. It's become normalized, totally. We can take.
Yeah, just, I think we have time for 2 more questions. So this one here.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being in Mysuru today, and I'm so happy that I'm so excited and I'm become speechless. I'm sure many ladies want to know this. You're reverse aging, and I want to know the secret for that.
Reverse aging.
You're reverse aging gracefully, so I want to know the secret for that.
I don't know about reverse aging. I'm aging, that much I can
No,
assure you. And I'm quite happy to age. Actually, I absolutely do believe. Every one of us, we look as good as we feel. And there is no magic trick.
You
There
are
is no
beautiful.
magic trick.
You are very beautiful.
Thank you so much. I can't take the credit for it. It's not an achievement. I have to thank my gene pool. And that's about it. And try and hang on to whatever is still left the best I can. And so I think organic cold-pressed coconut oil is my secret. So go ahead and use it. And, at 71, also, all of us can look our best. Yeah.
One last question.
Well, Shobha, I'm Dr. Gori. Your name is Shobha Day, and I must tell you that she has made our day.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
Mysuru is known for its silk, its attire, its saris, and what a wonderful way you have presented yourself today by wearing this. My question to you, ma'am, comes not from me, but from my wife. She's not here, she's in the US. She's 71 years old. And she is a firm follower of a regime which makes her very much look like what you look like. This I'm telling because it's a praise from a husband who is 69 years old. And Shobha is known to promote harmony between people. She writes the truth, and my question, ma'am, to you is, you have achieved so much in life, and you have gone at bullet train speed. What is your next 10 years? Is there going to be a book, Shobha at 80? And we pray Shobha will look the same at 80. Thank you.
I don't think I can be that cruel by imposing yet one more decade on my readers. I'm much more considerate, so I'm not going to, I haven't even planned on anything of that sort. At this age, I can only be filled with gratitude for each new day and look forward to a new discovery and a new adventure. And that's about it. Yeah.
One last question.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for your time. I want to ask you, you've achieved so much, and you have an opinion, you write about things, and you take up issues. And as you said, that a lot of times, a lot of people must be coming to you and telling you, don't do this, or don't do that, or write this. How do you keep yourself original? What's your process like? How do you filter it and say that, no, this is what I believe I'll write, or this is what I would.
Do you seriously imagine people walking up to me and saying, don't write this? Hasn't happened, ma'am. No, it hasn't happened.
I'm afraid there we must leave it. We've run out of time, sadly, although I feel we could have been talking to Shobha all day, although,
Thank you, Mahesh, you were just gorgeous. Gorgeous, thank you so much.
Thank you all for being a wonderful audience, and thank you, Shobha.
I have an important announcement, a couple of them. Shobha Day will be signing at the lawn area if you want her to autograph you the book that you purchased. But please move as carefully as possible. There are wires all over, and there are a lot of senior citizens. Book club registration, Book club registration will happen at the Contemporary Corner. We have books. Let's honor Shobha and Mahesh and then get on. I'm going to read. Let's give her a very big hand. It's wonderful to have Shobha with us today.
We have books by Sujata Rajpal, Lakshmi Palekanda, Dr. Srinivasan, and Sita Bhaskar at the Contemporary Bookstore. Just to remind you, book signing by Shobha Day will be in the lawn. For your information, all recordings of these sessions that we are having from yesterday and today are available
one, is it? Yes, this one right now. We're all talking about. She's the then I think. Oh, I see. What do you want?
Start off? Okay. Can everyone please settle down? Please please sit down. Yes. Okay, good morning everyone. From diplomacy to peace building in South India and China, 1949 to 1962. Along with the Asian Symphony Foundation, a not-for-profit trust which is dedicated to promoting mutual understanding in South Asia through the creation of a South Asian Symphony Orchestra. We look forward to learning how music builds a bridge between diplomacy and peace building. Welcome, ma'am.
Can you switch off the light? Diffuse it? No, the lights here, is it possible or?